Her world crumbled, and the most valuable part of her life was stolen 18 years ago when her toddler was abducted from a daycare. However, something startling happens one day when she opens a fashion magazine. Standing amidst the lofty bookcases of the Asheville Public Library, Clara Marin systematically rearranged the books, taking in the comforting aroma of paper and binding glue. Her light brown hair was now flecked with silver at 45 years of age, yet her hands continued to move with the same deliberate accuracy they had been honing for the previous 20. She had found solace in the library as she had weathered the most heartbreaking chapter of her life. She noticed motion at the library door as she returned a worn book of To Kill a Mockingbird to its shelf. As she drew near the entrance, a mother who appeared to be in her late 20s juggled a toddler's hand with a shopping bag. The toddler's blonde pigtails swung like pendulums as she hopped from one step to the next. "Pardon me," the mother yelled as she walked up to Clara's desk. "Have you any idea where the children's section is?" Clara asked with a friendly smile. The mother softly tugged at her daughter's hand as she replied, "Thank you. It's just through that archway, and to your left." The library had received new picture books the day before, but the little one had different ideas. Her little fingers fluttered to a display of multicolored bookmarks, scattering a few on the floor. "Sophie, no touching," the mother softly reprimanded as she crouched to gather the various bookmarks. As Clara waved away her embarrassed mother's apology, she said, "It's quite all right." She then giggled. "That's totally their purpose, to get people's attention." The girl's wide eyes met Clara's, and she flashed a toothy smile that ensnared Clara's heart in a recollection. That grin, as carefree and inquisitive as Ella herself, seemed to want to soak up all the world had to offer. As the mother and daughter disappeared into the children's section, Clara's prepared grin faded. Even though it had been 18 years, she could still vividly recall that horrific day in situations like these. She arrived for pickup to find 3 voicemails from Little Acorn's daycare that had gone unheard. The call she'd missed while she was shelved books in the library basement. The 3 police cars parked outside, their lights casting ominous red and blue shadows across the playground equipment. "There has to be an error," she informed the responding officer. "I'm just here to pick up my daughter, Ella Marin." Then there was the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the gentle way he had asked her to come inside, and the security footage they showed her later that week. A trusted staff member, Maurice Pledger, leading Ella to the playground gate, checking his surroundings and swiftly bundling the child into a waiting car. The quest took up all of their time for months. Under such pressure, Clara's marriage collapsed. Because he couldn't stand being around constant reminders of their lost kid, her husband David left the house before the year ended. Though Clara insisted on remaining in Asheville, imagine for a second that Ella managed to get back. What if new information about the case was discovered? After 2 weeks of searching Pisgah National Forest, the cops discovered Morris's lifeless body dangling from a tree. They assumed blame and declared it was suicide. But Ella has gone missing. Even though Clara did her best to keep the case alive, it became increasingly cold as the years went by. Every missing kid report, news article, and flyer that Clara attached to telephone poles until they crumbled with age, and weather showed Ella's unique port wine birthmark, a violet-hued patch around her left eye shaped like a lotus blossom. A voice spoke, "Clara," and she snapped back to the here and now. Sarah, who worked alongside her, was staring at her anxiously. "Are you all right?" "You've stared at that shelf for 5 minutes," Clara said, her eyes quick to blink. As Sarah's countenance softened with comprehension, she said, "I'm fine, just remembering." After 15 years of collaboration, she understood the significance of those moments of silence. "Why don't you head to the back room? The new deliveries came in this morning." "I'll finish up here," Clara gave her blessing. Even after all this time, she was occasionally taken aback by the generosity of strangers. Neatly arranged by the reception desk in the rear room were cardboard cartons. As her thoughts settled into the familiar routine, Clara retrieved a box cutter from the drawer and proceeded to slowly open the first package. They contained the monthly magazine subscriptions that had been surprisingly popular with their customers, including The Atlantic, National Geographic, and a number of glossy fashion magazines. Just as Clara was about to enter the stack into the system, the top magazine, jerked her hand back. Fashion magazine. The cover featured a young woman with a lotus-shaped birthmark around her left eye, a distinguishing violet mark, and her familiar eyes were staring back at her. The model looked anything but ordinary with her sun-kissed denim jeans, patterned scarf tied over her head, off-the-shoulder red top, and Sunlight Farm in the backdrop. A knee-buckling moment ensued as Clara read the headline. The new elegance. In an effort to stabilize herself, she reached for the edge of the desk. As a sound that sounded like a combination of gasp and sob from her lips, her other hand instinctively went to cover her mouth. The face had changed, with more pronounced cheekbones and a firm jawline replacing the rosy features of youth, but Clara could still spot that birthmark anywhere. As she rocked Ella to sleep, she had traced it with her finger innumerable times. She had told everybody who would listen, from police officers to sketch artists, about it. Clara Marin looked down at her daughter with shaking hands after 18 years of fruitless attempts and dwindling optimism. The crisp pages of the magazine crackled under Clara's hands as she opened it open. Even while the cover photo piqued her interest, the editorial spread was the turning point. Within, on page 32, she came upon a feature article titled "A Visual Ode to the Hands and Hearts That Keep America Growing." The photographs depicted breathtaking, candid shots of farm life in rural America, each one imbued with an authenticity seldom seen in high-fashion magazines, and her heart raced like a trapped bird. Looking over her shoulder at the camera, the young woman Clara thought was Ella reappeared in a full-page shot. The other models were all dressed primly for the shoot, but this one had an air of spontaneity. The woman seemed like she was actually working, pausing only to catch her breath. Sunlight streaming through her light brown locks revealed honey gold strands that Clara had seen in her reflection. Even when viewed from a side angle, the birthmark was clearly visible. Emmy Wells, 20, at Kessler Farm in rural Appalachia. Clara quickly glanced at the caption and saw that it matched. Ella Marin would be 20 today, having been nearly 2 when she vanished 18 years ago. But the name was correct. Clara steadied herself with a long breath and started reading the interview excerpt that came with the pictures. "What's your name?" "Emmy Wells, Ma." "That's a lovely name." "Thanks. My mama says I was born with dirt in my veins. Why don't you wear makeup like your friends?" "Didn't have time. Was hauling hay before you showed up. Your eyes. There's something rare about them." The article then moved on to cover more general agricultural issues, such as the economic struggles of local farmers, the environmental consequences of sustainable farming practices, the rise of traditional farming techniques among younger generations, and the challenges of competing with imported products. However, Clara hardly paid attention to these facts. Instead, she was captivated by the young woman who had a striking resemblance to her daughter, both in terms of her age and the birthmark. There was an air of quiet determination and beautiful strength in her look that brought back vivid memories of David. The article's concluding section provided Clara with the information she sought: Leah Dalton's photos. Looking up at the wall clock, she saw that it was 2:15 p.m. Clara hurriedly looked up Detective Gary Holden's number on her cell phone. Ella kept his number preserved since he had been the lead investigator on her case years ago, even though they hadn't spoken in a while. After Gary's recorded voice requested Clara to leave a message, she hung up instead, and the call went directly to voicemail. The magazine she held in her hands had an air of immediacy and significance that belied the idea of leaving a voicemail to explain the situation. Sarah was assisting an old customer at the front desk as Clara quickly retrieved her magazine and pocketbook, having made up her mind. "Sarah, I have to go now," Clara said with a clipped voice and wide eyes betraying her barely held emotion. After Sarah studied Clara's expression, she glanced down at the magazine that Clara was holding with clenched fists. As Clara turned the magazine to reveal the cover, she asked, "What's happened?" As soon as Sarah recognized the birthmark, her hand shot to her mouth, and she said, "I believe I found her, Sarah. I think I found Ella." When Clara's kid went missing, word quickly spread throughout the library. Many patrons had even helped hand out flyers during the first panic. "Go," Sarah instructed without delay. "We can cover your shift. Would you like someone to accompany you?" "No. I have to go to the police station and show them this. Clara was already making her way toward the door, as if she was terrified the magazine may disappear if she waited any longer. After Sarah yelled after her, "Let us know what happens," Clara paused before offering a hesitant smile. "Good luck." As soon as they heard the noise, other employees glanced up from their work. Diane from circulation came next, after Marty from reference. As Clara made her way to the exit, she was greeted with a barrage of encouraging remarks and well wishes as they saw the magazine. Behind the wheel of her weathered Honda Civic, Clara eased into the parking lot, the magazine delicately resting on the passenger seat next to her. She sat there for a while, her hands clenched over the wheel, trying to force herself to breathe. She had learned to be cautious with her hopes after 18 years of fruitless searches, but the birthmark, that unique mark, couldn't have been a coincidence. It complemented Ella's style too well. It was too special. The police station was Clara's destination. She went inside and arranged to meet the police officer at the lobby desk. She showed the magazine and asked whether Detective Gary Holden was present when she made her inquiries. In response, the cops informed her that she may wait. Once inside, she was escorted to meet the detective. When Clara last saw Detective Gary Holden, he was much older, with graying hair and wrinkles all over his face. Still, she recalled that he had the same kind, dogged look in his eyes. Clara knew he would never fully move on from the case of Ella's disappearance, which had been one of his first significant cases as a young detective. "Clara," he remarked, getting up from his seat. "It's been a while." She placed the magazine on his desk and continued. "I found something," without making any introductions. After showing him the magazine, Clara told him, "I think I found Ella." They checked the photo against Ella's childhood photos, and sure enough, the birthmark, which was shaped like a lotus, was there. The investigator wasted no time getting in touch with the fashion magazine's agency to inquire about Leah Dalton, the photographer, in their most recent publication. To ensure that Clara could hear as well, the investigator pressed the call's speaker button. According to the magazine agency's story to the police, they found inspiration for this month's issue by traveling to distant farms in rural Appalachia and other historic, traditional American locations. In her candid, unscripted photography, Leah Dalton captured rural families going about their daily lives. The phone representative was ecstatic about the photo's authenticity. "Ms. Dalton has an incredible talent for capturing authentic moments," the woman said. The news article has been receiving positive comments, according to Detective Gary. "We're contacting you for a particular photo of Emmy Wells, the young lady featured on the cover. What a treasure she was. Just a country girl with the most fascinating birthmark. Absolutely no model. She appears quite enigmatic, doesn't it?" Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears as the woman casually discussed her daughter's distinctive mark. The detective requested the specific location where they took the photograph of Emmy Wells. They said it was at the Kessler farm. The owners of the farm were John and Miriam Kessler. The representative said there's no specific point on the map, but they gave them another farm's name and location, saying that Kessler Farm was about 10 miles north of it. "This is enough to reopen the investigation," he said carefully. After the phone call ended, "I'll put together a team to visit the Kessler Farm immediately." Clara stood up, determination etched on her face. "I'm going with them." Gary hesitated. "Clara, in cases like this, I'm going." "Gary," she interrupted, her eye refused to waste any more time. "This is the closest we've ever come." "I understand, but I have to take care of some business first," Gary said, after a little pause. "You won't be attending?" "I have an important court appearance later on today that I must not miss," Clara said with a sigh. "I will ensure that my top officers are dispatched, and I will personally be there tomorrow," he stated with an air of regret. Clara grudgingly nodded. "When can we leave?" she asked. "We need to figure out if this Emmy Wells is your Ella, and, if so, how she ended up at the Kessler farm. In 30 minutes, I will have a crew prepared." "Clara, I need you to prepare yourself. 2 officers will accompany you to the farm," Gary said, pausing to put a hand on her shoulder. "Even if this girl is Ella, she has spent the last 18 years pretending to be someone else. I know, but she's my daughter. Even if she doesn't remember you, I will be devastated," Clara said and gulped hard. That's all that matters right now. As promised, within half an hour, Clara found herself being introduced to Officers Bennett and Martinez, who would be accompanying her to the Kessler farm. "I'd like to follow in my own car," Clara told them. "I have some of Ella's childhood belongings in the trunk, things I've kept just in case." The officers exchanged glances but agreed to her request. As Clara walked toward the parking lot, her heart hammered with equal parts hope and fear. After nearly 2 decades of emptiness, she was finally on the path to finding her daughter, a daughter who might not even know she was lost. The convoy of 2 vehicles, Clara's Honda Civic trailing the marked police cruiser, wound its way out of Asheville and into the countryside, the paved highways narrowing into winding roads through dense forests and rolling hills. Over the 2-hour drive, gripping the wheel tightly, Clara followed closely, each passing mile fueling the storm inside her. Hope that she was about to see her daughter again, and terror that Emmy Wells might look at her as a stranger. The afternoon sun hung high in the clear autumn sky when the GPS finally announced they were approaching their destination. The police car slowed, turning onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign, Kessler Farm. Established, the property was impressive, a sprawling farmhouse with a wide front porch surrounded by well-maintained barns and outbuildings. Fields of crops stretched into the distance, and a small orchard occupied the hillside behind the house. This was no struggling family farm, but a prosperous agricultural operation. As Clara parked behind the police cruiser, a middle-aged couple emerged from the farmhouse. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of decades working outdoors. The woman beside him was petite, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her expression weary as she observed the police car. Officers Bennett and Martinez approached the couple, badges displayed. Clara hung back slightly, her heart thundering in her chest as she strained to hear the conversation. "Mr. the Kessler woman?" The man's name was John Kessler, and this was his wife, Miriam. "That's right," Officer Bennett verified. "The police have come all the way out here for what?" "Mrs. Claraman," Officer Bennett said, gesturing toward Clara. "According to the magazine, a young woman named Emmy Wells was working here when they did their photo shoot. According to her, she has reason to believe that a young woman who was photographed on your property might be her daughter who went missing 18 years ago." John and Miriam exchanged a quick glance that Clara couldn't quite interpret. "You must mean the magazine people," Miriam said carefully. "They were here a few weeks ago taking pictures for some fashion spread. We're looking for a young woman named Emmy Wells," Officer Martinez clarified. "According to the magazine, she was working here when they did their photo shoot." John Kessler shook his head slowly. "Emmy doesn't work for us permanently. It was just a day of her pitching in to help. As a kind of labor sharing, we switch out our employees every week for those from neighboring farms." As I pulled out a childhood photo of Ella, I noticed that she had a unique birthmark around her left eye, just like the young woman in these photographs, Clara explained, her voice surprisingly steady as she broke the silence. "My kid was removed from her daycare when she was nearly 2 years old," Miriam said with a sympathetic expression. "I'm really sorry about your daughter, Mrs. Marin." She examined the picture that Clara had held out. "I'll admit that the birthmark is similar, but Emmy happened to be working here that day. I can't imagine what you've gone through. We haven't seen her since the photo session. Do you have any idea how we can locate her?" "I think she came from Rowan's farm," John said as he thoughtfully scratched his beard in response to Officer Bennett's question. "We get day laborers from him when we need more help." "Rowan, do you happen to have his complete name and address?" Clara inquired again. "All it takes is Rowan," John shook his head. "It's always been this way in my family. My dad's generation did it. Though I do have his number, I have no idea where his apartment is precisely because I have never been there myself." He retrieved a little notepad from his pocket, tore out a page, and scribbled a number on it. "It sounds like it's coming from the mountains." "Thank you, Mr. Kessler." Officer Martinez accepted the paper. "Pretty isolated. For the sake of completeness, would you mind if we walked around your property a bit?" John reluctantly agreed, his tone betraying his uncertainty. "I'm not sure what you're hoping to discover, but you're more than welcome to take a look," Officer Bennett responded. "Thank you, Mrs. Kessler." "Hey, Marin, Mind hanging around while we have a look around the place? Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the officers moved toward the barn, she found herself studying the Kesslers. There was something in their manner that didn't quite sit right with her. A careful precision to their words, tension in their postures that seemed at odds with their cooperative attitudes. Miriam noticed her scrutiny and offered a tight smile. "Would you like some water or tea, Mrs. Maroon?" "Thanks, but it's a long way from Asheville." Clara paused before continuing. "Did Emmy talk about her childhood or family while she was here?" According to Miriam, not really. The woman in question was reserved and kept to herself. "Good worker, though, very diligent," John nodded in agreement. "Farm kids usually are raised with a strong work ethic." 20 minutes later, the officers returned with neutral expressions. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. and Mrs. Kessler," Officer Martinez said. "Everything seems to be in order." The group returned to the vehicles, where Officer Bennett called the station, relayed Rowan's phone number, and asked for any information they could find. Clara listened as Bennett explained the situation, then waited as the dispatcher ran the number through their database. After a few minutes, Bennett ended the call with a frown. "Nothing," he informed Clara and his partner. "The number doesn't appear in any of our systems, and there's no cellular service registered. Rowan may be outside of typical service regions if he lives as far away as the Kesslers claim." "What does that imply?" I said. "How can we locate him?" Clara inquired, her voice filled with despair. "Perhaps we might attempt contacting the number directly," Martinez proposed, and he proceeded to dial the number. After a few moments, he shook his head in disapproval, and there was no connection either. "Either the number is wrong or he's somewhere without service," Clara thought as she checked her watch. The time was approaching 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The days of fall were getting shorter, and darkness would descend in just a few hours. "What do we do now?" she asked herself. "How can we find this farm without a specific location?" she said, her voice betraying her despair. Bennett let out a sigh. "Our best bet, in my opinion, is to get back to Asheville, stock up on supplies, and have a new day tomorrow." "All right," she reluctantly agreed. "But I'm not going all the way back to Asheville tonight. Detective Holden will be available tomorrow, and he might have some additional ideas or contacts." Clara wanted to protest, to insist they keep searching, but her pragmatic side knew they were right. Without a clear direction, they could spend hours driving through remote mountain roads and still don't find anything. "I'll book a room in a nearby hotel or motel. That way, we can start early tomorrow." The officers nodded in understanding. "That's reasonable," Martinez said. "We'll report back to the station and coordinate with Detective Holden for tomorrow morning." As they parted ways, Clara sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the Kessler farmhouse in her rearview mirror. Something about John and Miriam's carefully measured responses nagged at her. They had been polite, sympathetic even, but there was a guardedness about them that seemed out of place for people with nothing to hide. With a deep breath, Clara started her engine. She was closer to finding Ella than she'd been in 18 years. One more night wouldn't break her, not after all this time. The fading afternoon light cast long shadows across the rural landscape as Clara drove away from the Kessler farm. Her mind raced with unanswered questions, her emotions oscillating between hope and frustration. After driving for about 20 minutes, she spotted a modest roadside establishment with a flickering neon sign. Pine Ridge Motel vacancy. The motel was a single-story building with perhaps a dozen rooms. Clara parked in front of the office and stepped out, stretching her stiff limbs after the long day of driving. Inside, a middle-aged woman with bottle-red hair and reading glasses perched on her nose looked up from a dog-eared paperback. "Help you. I need a room for the night," she said, putting down her book. "Just one person. $29 includes cable TV and hot water," the lady told her, shoving a registration card over the desk. "By the way, I'm Doy. I own the place." Clara filled out the form and handed over her cash. As Doy processed the payment, Clara noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising local attractions. One image caught her eye, a rustic building with strings of lights illuminating a wooden deck. "What's that place?" Doy glanced over and said, "Oh, that's Miller's Tavern." The woman was pointing at the brochure when she inquired. She gestured toward the window, where Clara could make out a bigger structure across the highway, and said, "They've got good food, live music sometimes. Popular spot around here, just across the road. Actually, their comedy night is, I believe, tonight. Does it get busy with locals?" Clara asked as she took the room key, her thoughts already planning. "Always draws a crowd, absolutely, particularly on nights when there are events. Anyone from farmers to craftspeople. Everyone from the area congregates there." Doy looked at Clara with a fresh attitude of curiosity. "You're not from around here, are you?" "It's about the only entertainment for 20 miles in any direction. Actually, I'm trying to find someone in Asheville," Clara said. After a moment of hesitation, she produced a magazine she had stashed away, exposing the cover that featured Emmy. "Have you ever laid eyes on this young woman?" she said. "I have no idea. She might be known as Emmy Wells." Doy strained her eyes and shook her head in disbelief. "What about a man named Rowan?" Clara asked with a hint of disappointment. "That birthmark is something else, though. Pretty girl, though." She returned Clara's magazine and shook her head, saying, "Sorry, honey, there are a lot of farmers around here and I can't be certain. However, as I mentioned before, the tavern gets all the locals. The person claimed to have a farm in the Highlands." "Thank you," Clara replied, putting her phone in her pocket. "I'll give it a go later on tonight. Roommate," Doy said, passing over a key tethered to a plastic tag. "Right by the ice machine, at the end of the row, checkouts at 11 tomorrow." Clara thanked her again and retreated to her room. After a quick shower to rinse off the day's tension, she waited until the event's start time before heading to the tavern. If local insight could lead her to the elusive Rowan and possibly to Emmy, she couldn't risk missing the chance. Miller's Tavern was exactly as Clara had imagined a rural country establishment would be. Wooden walls adorned with vintage farming equipment and taxidermy, mismatched tables and chairs scattered throughout the space, and a long bar stretching along one wall. The air was thick with the smell of fried food, beer, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that had seeped into the wood over decades. Despite it being a weeknight, the place was bustling. A small stage at the far end of the room featured a young man with a beard and flannel shirt delivering punchlines to an appreciative audience. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Clara made her way to the bar. She found an empty stool and settled in, scanning the room. Most patrons were focused on the comedy show, though some gathered around the large wooden tables at the back, engaged in their own conversations. At the bar itself, a few solitary drinkers nursed their beverages, seemingly regulars based on their comfortable demeanor. "What can I get you?" a voice asked. Clara turned to find a bartender looking at her expectantly. He was young, early 20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail and the kind of easy smile that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. "Just a club soda, please," Clara replied. The bartender nodded, filling a glass with ice and soda water. As he placed it before her, he tilted his head curiously. "First time at Miller's?" Clara gave him a subtle nod before asking, "Is it that obvious?" "I'm Bran." "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said with a laugh. "Small town. I know most faces that come through that door." He then reached out to shake hands with her. "This is my dad's place, but I'm the one who runs it most nights." The name Pledger shocked Clara. It was the surname of the daycare worker who had abducted Ella. But it couldn't be. Pledger wasn't a common name, and this young man would have been a child when Ella disappeared. Despite her shock, Clara managed to return his handshake and introduced herself as Clara Marin. "So, Clara Marin," Brand said, leaning slightly against the bar. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Oh," Brand arched an eyebrow. "Do you know anyone I could meet?" Clara asked, her ideas coalescing as she sipped her club soda. "I'm actually looking for someone, my daughter," Clara said honestly after hesitating. "I never found her." Brand's casual smile vanished, replaced by genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. She was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old, and the words still catch in her throat even after all this time. My God, that is terrible." When Clara reached for the magazine, she quickly realized it wasn't in her bag. "Oh, my bad. I think I might have a lead," she replied. "Time is wearing down this mind. My baby has a unique birthmark, and I left it in my car. However, I did see a fashion magazine article about a young woman who had it. Brand straightened slightly and asked, "The Kesslers?" The photo was shot at their farm, which is close by. They aren't regulars here. The woman in the photo was named Emmy Wells. The Kesslers said she was a day worker. As Clara spoke, Brand's expression changed subtly. He clenched his jaw and tightened his eyes. "My mother worked at a daycare center before she passed away." Brand's voice became quieter suddenly. "Oh, where was that?" Clara asked, her heart skipping a beat. "But she passed away when I was young." "Asheville," Brand responded. "My dad brought me up after that," he said, pointing nebulously toward the inn. "He started this place from scratch." Clara felt a shiver go down her spine. What were the chances of such a coincidence? "Your mom," she started cautiously. "What was her name?" "Maurice," he answered. "Maurice Pledger." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Maurice Pledger, the daycare worker who had taken Ella, the woman whose body had been found in the forest 2 weeks after the abduction. Clara struggled to keep her expression neutral as her mind raced. The police had concluded that Maurice had committed suicide, probably out of guilt after selling Ella away, because the police couldn't find the girl. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," Clara replied, her voice low and steady. Just tired from the drive. As she looked around the bar, trying to gather her thoughts, Brand noticed her reaction and asked, "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Actually, I'm not." Clara took a deep breath. "Brand, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low but steady. "Your mother." "What do you mean?" Brand asked with a scowl. "I know who she was. I've seen her face hundreds of times, so I recognized her in that photo," Clara said, pulling out her phone to show an old news piece including a photo of Maurice. "Your mother was the daycare director?" "No," Brand murmured, shaking his head. "That can't be right." "The worker who took my daughter." His expression turned pale as he glanced between Clara and the phone. "She was a decent person, my mother. My dad always stated that the surveillance footage from Little Acorns Daycare showed her escorting my daughter to a waiting car." Clara went on, her voice growing stronger. 2 weeks later, her body was discovered in Pisgah National Forest. According to the authorities, she committed herself due to feelings of guilt. Brand, who was extremely distressed, leaned against the bar and said, "This can't be happening." He then raised his voice and asked, "Are you sure?" "I'm positive, Brand. I'm quite sure it was her," Clara said while nodding. His voice strained to be heard over the ongoing comedy show as Brand leaned forward at an empty table. "My dad told me Mom died because of debt collectors," he said, his voice barely audible. "He said my mom had paid back a man my dad owed money to, but the man killed her anyway and made it look like suicide." "I'm sorry." He then quickly covered his face with his palm before turning to another bartender and calling out, "Jake, cover for me." Without waiting for a response, he motioned for Clara to accompany him to a more peaceful area of the tavern. The official account was that she committed suicide by hanging herself from a tree, but concerns persisted. Clara paused for a moment before asking, "Did your father ever bring up the possibility of having a child? About what happened to her?" Brand shook his head vehemently. "No, never. Mom died when I was just 5 years old." His eyes widened in shock as he realized, "You believe my mom used your daughter to settle my dad's debts, and then, what sold her?" His father rarely spoke about the incident since it hurt him so much. Softly, Clara acknowledged, "That was the police theory, but they never found Ella." Brand remained silent for a long time as he processed this knowledge. Eventually, he spoke up, saying, "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours." The trail then went cold. His really sorry eyes met Clara's, and he said, "I had no idea that this Emmy person might be your daughter. The birthmark is the same, a violet patch resembling a lotus blossom around the left eye. And she's the same age," as Clara confirmed with a nod. "As for the Kesslers, they brought up a man named Rowan." "Rowan is my father's name," Brand whispered, more to himself than to Clara. "Your father is Rowan Pledger?" Clara said in astonishment. "I'd know Rowan's number anywhere, but that's the old one," Brand said slowly, pulling out his phone to show her dad's contact entry. "The Kesslers lied," Clara whispered. "They said they didn't know where Rowan lived, that he was somewhere in the mountains." No longer did the new number match the one John Kessler had given to the police. However, according to Bran, he has a place about 20 minutes from here, a small farm, so even if he owns the bar, your father doesn't inhabit in. He paused, a guilty smile forming on his face. I don't see him much these days. Not since what? Not nearly as much as the Kessler's operation, but enough to grow a few crops and raise a few animals ever since I learned about his gambling issues, Clara softly prodded Bran, who heaved a heavy sigh. Despite the tavern's recent success, Dad continues to struggle. He looked into Clara's eyes with a new sense of resolve. But I think it's time I paid him a visit, and I think you should come with me. Clara felt a mix of hope and apprehension as she asked, "You do that even after what I just told you about your mother?" "It's not too late. We could go now," Bran said firmly. Especially because of that, he then glanced at his watch and added, "If my family had anything to do with taking your daughter, then I need to help make it right now," she asked furiously. Bran nodded. "Jake can handle the bar for the rest of the night." He stared at Clara closely. "Unless you'd rather wait until morning and get the police involved?" Clara echoed, suddenly frightened at how quickly things were moving. While Bran stood tall and determined, Clara shook her head and said, "I've waited 18 years. I don't want to wait another minute." Bran then proceeded to tell Jake that he was going, and the two of them could depart. "I have some things there, photographs, belongings of Ella that I've kept," Clara interrupted, "but I'll follow in my car. My car's out back. They might help." With a nod of agreement, Bran went to inform his co-worker while Clara finished her drink, her mind racing with possibilities. Was she finally on the verge of finding Ella after all these years? And if so, what role had Rowan Pledger played in her disappearance? The night had fully settled over the rural landscape as Clara followed Bran's pickup truck along winding back roads. Her headlights illuminated the occasional reflective eyes of wildlife watching from the roadside, and the moon cast an ethereal glow over the rolling countryside. During a straight stretch of road, Clara quickly used her phone to text Detective Holden that she believed she was getting closer to finding her daughter and shared her pinpoint location with him, just in case. She knew the reception was spotty in these rural areas, but hoped the message would go through. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind replaying Bran's revelations about his parents. If Rowan Pledger was indeed the mysterious Rowan mentioned by the Kesslers, and if he was Morris's husband, then the connections were becoming clearer and more disturbing. But one detail nagged at her. John Kessler had claimed Rowan lived up in the mountains, yet Bran's directions were taking them through relatively flat farmland. Either the Kesslers had been deliberately misleading, or they weren't talking about the same Rowan. After about 20 minutes of driving, Bran's pickup slowed, turning onto a narrow dirt road marked only by a weathered mailbox. Clara followed cautiously, her sedan bouncing over the uneven surface. Before they reached the house, Clara noticed a vehicle, an older model sedan, laying out of the driveway ahead. Bran must have noticed as well, and that vehicle must be Rowan's because Bran's pickup had trailed behind it, putting a distance between Clara and the sedan. The roads became progressively narrower, the landscape more densely wooded. Clara drove more slowly than Rowan's car, unfamiliar with the terrain and concerned about damaging her vehicle on the rough roads. Bran, however, seemed determined not to lose sight of his father's car. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the car ahead turned into a clearing. As Clara followed Bran's truck into the open space, she saw a small farmhouse and several outbuildings. The property was modest compared to the Kesslers' operation, but well-maintained, with a small vegetable garden visible in the moonlight and a fenced pasture where a few goats were visible. Rowan's car was parked haphazardly near the house, its driver's door still open. Bran pulled up beside it, and Clara parked a short distance away. As she exited her car, Clara could hear Bran calling out to his father. "Dad, what are you doing at the farm this late?" "I passed your house and saw you leave," said Rowan Pledger, a towering figure with brown hair, streaked with gray, who stood beside his car. Rowan's weathered face betrayed a mix of perplexion and exhaustion as he glanced from Bran to Clara. "Bran, what brings you here?" With a strong and rough voice, he inquired, "And who is this woman?" "This is Clara Moreau, Dad. Bran said as he walked tensely up to his father. What on earth are you talking about? She came to the tavern seeking her daughter, a daughter who was abducted by Mom 18 years ago, Rowan said with a confused look on his face. With an emotionally charged tone, Bran told his father, Your mother never abducted anyone. He went on to say, She did, Dad. Clara has proof, security camera footage from the daycare where Mom worked. This is absolutely absurd. She abducted Clarara's daughter, Ella. Rowan's gaze whipped around to Clara before returning to his son. You wouldn't wake this woman up in the middle of the night to make charges like this, would you? Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Mister, my intention is not to cause difficulties, pledger. My only one is to locate my daughter. The Kesslers provided me with your contact information after mentioning Rowan, who is responsible for hiring day laborers for their farm. There was no way for me to get in touch with you, no matter how much I tried. A change happened in Rowan's demeanor as the Kesslers were brought up. His shoulders stiffened and his face became more expressionless. Those wealthy dweebs, he murmured softly, then raised his voice. Listen, I have no idea what the Kesslers told you, but just as he was about to continue speaking, the farmhouse front door swung open, and a young woman stepped out onto the porch. Rowan, she called out, what's happening out there? Tell me why you stayed outside. The voice belonged to a young woman Clara couldn't quite make out in the darkness, but her silhouette was unmistakable, tall and slender, with hair that fell past her shoulders. Clarara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? But Rowan quickly moved to intercept any view of the porch. Nothing to worry about, he called back. Just some unexpected visitors. Come inside. I'll be right over. The stranger paused, then stayed on the porch, obviously interested in the disturbance in the middle of the night. Is that Emmy? He said. Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emmy Wells? Bran approached his father and asked, Dad, what's going on? Rowan's expression turned gloomy as he said, You need to leave, both of you. Now, could you tell me who that woman is and why your parents are referring day laborers to you? The standoff might have continued, but the young woman on the porch apparently decided to investigate for herself. She descended the steps and walked toward the group, her features gradually becoming visible in the combined glow of the porch light and the vehicle's headlights. What's happening? She asked, looking between the three adults with confusion. And that's when Clara saw it. The distinctive violet birthmark around the young woman's left eye, shaped exactly like a lotus blossom, exactly like Ella's. Oh my God, Clara breathed, her legs suddenly unsteady. The young woman, Emmy, looked at Clara with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Who are you? Clara took a hesitant step forward, every fiber of her being wanting to rush to the young woman and embrace her. But she restrained herself, recognizing the weariness in Emmy's expression. My name is Clara Mru, she said gently. I believe you might be my daughter. Emmy stared at Clara, her expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. What? You can't do that. Rowan moved in between them, his wrinkled face contorted with anxiety, and said, My parents' names are John and Miriam Kessler. Now please hang on. There is no evidence that this woman has anything. Emmy felt awkward touching the violet mark surrounding her left eye and asked, What about my birthmark? As Bran leaned in closer to her, inspecting her face with a renewed interest. The birthmark, he whispered, is exactly as Clara described. Clara slowly reached into her purse and withdrew her phone. With trembling fingers, she pulled up a photo album and turned the screen toward Emmy. This is my daughter, Ella. This doesn't make sense, Emmy muttered, her voice scarcely audible. I grew up on the farm. She was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old. 18 years ago, Emmy peered grudgingly at the computer, her eyes widening at the succession of photographs showing a youngster with an identical birthmark. John and Miriam have always been my roommates, Rowan said with a dismissive tone. This is absurd. Return to the interior, Emmy. If what you're saying is true, then John and Miriam aren't your parents, Clara finished softly. The Kesslers told me that you were a day worker sent by. Emmy ignored him, her attention fixed on Clarara's phone as she swiped through more childhood photos. Rowan, they said they didn't know anything about you. Emmy's face hardened as she snapped her head up in response. Oh, really? How? That is not true. I was brought up by my loving parents. Under his breath, Rowan cursed. Those idiots from Kessler. Why on earth did they decide to give out my phone and name? A look of distrust crossed Brand's face as he turned to face his father. Something is happening, Dad. Can you tell me anything about this? Rowan appeared to shrink a little as he peered between the three faces fixed on him. Hey, it's not easy. Hey, it's not complicated at all. With an edge that Clara had never heard before, Brand demanded. A hand ran through Rowan's thinning hair as he sat down. The Kesslers requested that I hold Emmy for a couple of weeks. That someone dangerous is looking for her. They might try to abduct her because they can't pay their debt, they warned. With a look of bewilderment on her face, Emmy echoed. Whose debt? Everything has been going swimmingly on the farm. That's what they informed me, Rowan adamantly stated. Creditors and other harmful individuals are allegedly pursuing you. Until things blew over, they wanted to keep you safe, Brand scoffed. So you put your faith in them? Following Mom's incident? Is his mother a concern? With her expression growing more troubled by the discoveries that were coming to light, Emmy inquired. A wary Clara warily advanced. Maurice Pledger, Brand's mom, was an employee at the Asheville Daycare Center Little Acorn. It was she who abducted my daughter, who abducted you 18 years ago. Because you would have been so little, Clara continued gently, you wouldn't remember anything from before. I don't know why you vanished when you were just 2 years old. Emmy's voice quivered a little as she asked. Someone should not kidnap me and leave my family. Brand shot an accusatory glance at his father. Dad owed money from his gambling addiction. Officers suspected that Mom abducted Ella in order to appease them. Emmy leaned clearly upset against the porch railing as she recounted the events surrounding Mom's death and how her creditors made it look like suicide. How did I meet John and Miriam, if I am indeed this Ella person? Your parents have always wanted children, Rowan said grudgingly. They were unable to access their own. John's history was the main reason they were repeatedly turned down for adoption despite their best efforts. They purchased me? He had some legal issues when he was younger, so they figured out a different way. Is this real? Emmy said, her voice betraying her shock. Subtly, Rowan gave a nod. From the same group responsible for Morris's death. Even though it was a mild evening, Emmy embraced herself as if she were suddenly chilly since those creditors weren't loan sharks. They were involved in more lucrative companies. Then all the things I believed about myself were false. This is insane, Emmy exclaimed, her voice trembling with rage. Everyone is out to get you with their lies. As darkness descended, the faraway rumble of sirens pierced the air, signaling an impending threat. Someone contacted the authorities, Rowan exclaimed, his voice betraying his growing anxiety. This is unbelievable, Emmy firmly stated, no more running, implying that the Kesslers would pursue me if they were aware of the trafficking or suspected police involvement. Enough with the lies, she said, drawing out her phone and displaying the screen. As soon as I overheard you two fighting outside, I contacted them. The farmyard was illuminated by the flashing lights of police cruisers as multiple cops drew near. I demand the truth, the whole truth, and I'm not scared to confront it. Even though Clara had seen a few of them earlier in the day, she could not find Officers Bennett and Martinez. So what's happening? As he carefully examined the situation, an officer questioned, his hand resting cautiously on his holster. Emmy took a forward stride. I contacted you. I have always been informed that my name is Emmy Wells. However, this woman, she pointed to Clara, claims that I am her abducted daughter from 18 years ago. The officer's peripheral vision narrowed as he made the connection. You're the one from Asheville who went missing, the one with the birthmark, the person said. Emmy nodded, her hand instinctively going to the violet mark that framed her eyebrow. Clara made contact. The subject of the current alarm was confirmed by another officer who talked on his radio. To resolve this, it is imperative that each and every one of you report to the station, the first officer stated. In a dramatic turn of events, Clara went forward and informed the closest police officer about the Kesslers, detailing their role in the kidnapping of Emmy. As he called for reinforcements to bring the Kesslers in for interrogation, the officer's face became serious. "Please report to the station without delay," he admonished. "We have police officers investigating this area as a possible crime scene," the officer said, directing them to their respective police cars. Emmy noticed Clara as she was led to a cruiser. A complicated blend of fear, resolve, and a hint of optimism could be seen on the young woman's face. Upon arriving at the station, Clara was escorted to an interview room, which was a starkly furnished room with just a table, 3 chairs, and a prominently placed camera in one corner. A police officer brought her a glass of water and told her that Asheville Detective Holden was on his way after being alerted. "He requested that we inform you that he is approximately 1 hour away," the officer further revealed. "While we wait, we would like to hear your account of what transpired this evening," the investigators said. Clara detailed her search for the magazine, her visit to the Kessler farm, her encounter with Bran at the tavern, and her eventual confrontation with Rowan on his property. The officer meticulously recorded Clara's statements, pausing only to ask clarifying questions. Following her completion, the officer expressed gratitude before letting her be alone with her thoughts. The quiet room seemed to be filled with the gentle click of the institutional clock as it marked each minute. Time seemed to slip away at a leisurely pace. Even though it was probably only 45 minutes, the door finally opened after what seemed like hours. With a more serious look on his face than the prior cop, a new officer walked in. The woman. He sat down across from her and said, "Marin, I wanted to update you on the situation." They continued their conversation. "Mr. Pledger and the Kesslers have been interviewed independently. From what we can tell so far, there is strong evidence to back up your allegation that Emmy Wells is your biological daughter." Desperate for a child, the Kesslers claimed, approached intermediaries who promised to provide one for the right price. And they never questioned where the child came from, the officer said, continuing as Clara's heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name. Logical daughter, Ella Marin. What gave them the idea that they should keep Emmy, Ella, isolated on their farm and discourage her from making outside connections? Clara asked, her voice betraying her bitterness. They stole her entire life, her identity, the officer explained, continuing. They claimed they were told the child was being given up by a mother who couldn't care for her. They will be facing charges, the officer stated. Rowan Pledger, on the other hand, is cooperating by giving information about the trafficking network in which his wife was involved. Since he was apparently a part of it, the level of his involvement is still being confirmed. Where does that leave the matter of Maurice Pledger's death? His cooperation may lead to a reduction in his sentence, but he will still be charged with serious crimes related to these operations after years of being deemed a suicide. The case is being reopened if Rowan's claims are accurate, according to Clara's question. According to Mr. Pledger's statement, the officer verified, he asserts that the same criminal organization assassinated his wife out of fear that she might cooperate with authorities following the abduction's widespread media coverage. Clara nodded slowly, taking everything in. "And what's happening now, Emmy?" "Mrs. Marin, she is an adult," the police officer said with a hint of smile. "From a legal standpoint, she has complete autonomy over her whereabouts and the people she chooses to associate with." "Can I see her now?" "She has expressed interest in speaking with you further," Clara asked with a hopeful tone. "Detective Holden should be arriving shortly, but she's still being interviewed." "Afterward, yes." The officer rose up and adjusted his clothes. He's been briefed on the developments and will take over the case from here. As the officer reached the door, Clara called after him. "Officer, thank you for everything." He nodded once, then left her alone again with her thoughts and the steadily ticking clock. Clara sat in the small waiting area of the police station, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee held between her hands, more for comfort than consumption. The institutional lighting cast harsh shadows across the worn furniture, but Clara barely noticed her surroundings. Her eyes remained fixed on the hallway door, waiting for Ella, to emerge. When the door finally opened, Clara's breath caught in her throat. Emmy stood in the doorway, her posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her features. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward Clara, taking the seat beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was filled with 18 years of absence, of lives lived apart, of experiences never shared. Finally, Emmy broke the silence. I never thought I'd be in a police station at midnight, discovering my entire life has been a lie. Despite the gravity of her words, there was a surprising steadiness in her voice. I never thought I'd find you, Clara replied softly. After all these years, I'd started to believe I never would. Emmy turned to face her, studying Clara's features with careful attention. They're charging John and Miriam with kidnapping, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice. I'm sorry, Clara said, and found that she meant it. I know they raised you, cared for you. They did, Emmy acknowledged, but they also isolated me, controlled who I could see, where I could go. I guess now I know why, Clara said with a bitter smile. They always said it was for my protection, that the outside world was dangerous. After hesitating, Clara finally asked the question that had been bothering her. How did you end up in that magazine if they were so careful about keeping you hidden? It was an accident, Emmy said with a hint of a softening in her expression. Leah was snapping photographs of a nearby farm. She wandered onto our property after becoming disoriented. She noticed me as I was working in the fields and complimented my distinctive birthmark, saying it made me photogenic. A faint, proud smile curved her lips. For her, I grinned. Clara expressed her relief that she had gotten lost, explaining that her birthmark had led her to positively identify you. John and Miriam were enraged afterwards, but it was too late. The images were already set to be published. Clara reassured Emmy, "It's beautiful. Your father, your birth father, David, he called it your lotus mark. I would have recognized it anywhere." Emmy felt the tattoo awkwardly, recalling how the Kesslers had made her feel ashamed of it. "My father? He said it meant you were special," Emmy asked with a hint of curiosity. "Has he survived?" I said, Clara intoned. "We divorced a few years after you disappeared. The loss was too much for our marriage to bear. He remarried and moved to Colorado. We haven't spoken in years, but I know he'd want to meet you if you're interested." Emmy nodded slowly, taking in this knowledge. All my life, I felt different, out of place somehow. There were things about me that never made sense in the context of the Kesslers. The way I think, the things I'm drawn to. She went off on a tangent. "You have your father's kindness and determination. Even as a toddler, you showed those traits," Clara remarked gently, and Emmy looked at her with unexpected focus. "I have so many questions about who I was, who I am, about my life before. I'll answer anything I can," said Clara. "We have time now." The door to the hallway opened again, and the detective returned, his expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. He addressed them both after giving Clara a polite nod. Informing them, "The Kesslers are being processed for formal charges," what he said. According to Detective Holden, Jur will face charges for his involvement in the trafficking network, but his cooperation will be considered. The fact that he never actively participated in abductions may actually help his case. Ruample. Jur is cooperating fully with our investigation into the trafficking network. His information could help break up one of the largest human trafficking operations in the Southeast. What will happen to him? Emmy asked. More doors swung open, and Brand strode solemnly into the waiting room, his face betraying his emotions. "They're letting me go," he announced, striding over to the group. "They said I'm not implicated in any of this," with a heartfelt expression of regret. He glanced at Emmy and said, "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours." His ignorance was shocking to Emmy, who watched him intently. "It's not your fault. You might never have made the connection if I hadn't been working at the tavern tonight," Brand said to Clara, his voice filled with gratitude. "But you were only a child when it happened." The detective cleared his throat and said, "We'll need both of you back tomorrow for additional statements." Maybe it wasn't just chance. Clara then offered the possibility that some things are supposed to find a way. "Tomorrow, Detective Holden will also be present, but for the time being, you are free to depart. I was wondering if you have a place to stay tonight, Emmy." "Going back to the farm isn't something I want to do," Emmy said as she peered uncertainly at Clara. "No, not just yet. I need time to think about everything." A tentative invitation was made by Clara for you, to remain with her at the motel. "We can order another room if you want." John and Miriam glanced up at the Kesslers, their expressions betraying their shame and regret as the officers led them away to processing. Bran approached Emmy again and whispered, "It's strange. What happened 18 years ago shaped both of our lives, and neither of us knew it until today." Emmy tensed up at their presence. At that very moment, Emmy's expression changed. There was a hint of acceptance, maybe even a sliver of trust. Clara gently squeezed her daughter's hand and said, "We have time now to figure it all out, piece by piece." As Emmy opened her arms to embrace her, Clara embraced not just her daughter, but also her transformed self, a strong, independent spirit who had triumphed over seemingly insurmountable odds. They would confront any obstacles that came their way, reuniting and creating something new. Life had given them a second act they hadn't dared to imagine, one that was filled with the promise of healing, understanding, and a bond that could withstand 18 years of separation.